Fixing the Unfixable, the true challenges of technician management. Join passionate automotive trainer and coach Andrew Uglow as he gives valuable insights into the psychology of fixing in automotive workshops. Explore the importance of clear problem identification, technician engagement, and evolving management practices to optimize performance and efficiency in modern repair environments. Discover why understanding the root cause is crucial and how old management principles may need a reevaluation in today's tech-driven age. I'm your host, Anthony Pearl, and this is the Frictionless Workshop podcast. Let's get cranking. Andrew, I wanted to talk to you about this idea of fix this. I suppose that's really the concept of what workshops are about. People come in, can you fix this?
Yeah.
There's more to it than that, isn't there? There's the psychology behind that whole idea of, and that really drives the workshop itself, because that's what you're trying to achieve with optimal engagement.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it, in an environment where people are fixing things all the time. What are the operating systems? What are the methods that we go about managing our people? And when things don't work how we anticipated or don't hit an expectation or reach a KPI or hit a benchmark, we start to think about, well, how do we fix this? And good, right? That's certainly to my mind, it's a very natural thing. I mean, you can just fall on the ground and throw your arms around and have a moment on the floor, and that's one option. Or you can actually get resourceful and go, well, how do we fix this? And so we start talking about technician engagement. We start to talk about these senior people that just simply refuse to do peak performance. Well, how do you fix this? And before you fix anything, and again, having, like we was talking about, just having run a really hardcore diagnostic class, the first question that you ask is, what exactly is the problem? If you're going to fix anything, it doesn't matter what it is. What exactly is the problem? The first step of any routine or diagnostic process is always verify the concern. Is this actually doing what the customer says it's doing? And is that in fact wrong? Is that actually a problem? Because sometimes customers misunderstand how cars work and they perceive things to be a fault when they're in fact not. Mechanical components make noise, and sometimes customers can hear the noise. And a noise is simply sound that someone doesn't like. I would argue that there's music out there that I would describe as noise, and it's just simply sound that I don't like. And so,
one, by the way, in the automotive industry, just that I think is fascinating is because that whole idea of sound is fascinating, really, because we've now got cars that don't make any sound really when you drive, and people want the sound back.
Right. It's funny how things are circular like that. As a young tech, customers used to come in and complain that their car would stop and stall at traffic lights. Now customers come in and complain that it doesn't, because their start-stop system doesn't work. My car keeps running at traffic lights. It's like, well, some years ago, that was actually a good thing.
Yes.
And now it's not, now my car isn't making any noises. I want it fixed. But ultimately, we have to be super clear and explicit, like crazy explicit on what exactly the problem is. Because if we're not, we end up on a wild tangent right at the beginning. And it's a great way to lose time. It's a great way to frustrate people. It's a fantastic vacuum, black hole for money, for effort, for everything. And so if we're not clear on what the problem is, how do we know what to fix? How do you even know there's a problem? I don't know about you, but I wonder about how many people listening have ever tried to fix normal.
Yeah.
That's very tough. It's much easier fixing a problem than just trying to fix something that's normal. How do you even know it can be fixed if you don't know what the problem is? How do you know even where to start if you don't have a clear problem? And how do you measure your actions? There's the story of the pilot log. I think I've mentioned it in a previous podcast, where the pilots have written down in their log about problems that they've noticed when they've been flying the plane. And one of the pilots has written something loose in cabin. And so the aircraft technician has to respond to each of these items as part of what they have to do. And they've just written next to this comment, something loose in cabin, they've written something tightened in cabin. Being that something, like, I wonder how many different parts there are in an aircraft cabin? I imagine there's a few, right?
I hope there's a couple.
So how do you, if you don't know what the problem is, if you're not super clear and explicit on what that problem is, how do you know whether your actions are going to do any good? And how do you know if you fixed it if you don't know what it is to start with? And just as importantly, if you're not really clear on what the problem is and you take action, you could well make it worse.
And the opposite can be the case as well, by the way, that you can not take action and the problem can fix itself. And then if it comes back again, you don't know, how to fix it because you don't know what fixed it in the first place.
Right. And one of the banes of technician work is car comes in and you're not sure on what the problem is. So you just go and do some common remedies. So the customer might say their car's stalling, for example. And so you go and check all the connections and you push all the fuses in and you scan for fault codes and there's nothing there. And you do this and you do that and you tighten all these bits and pieces. And then you take it for a road test and now it stops stalling. Now, you don't know if you fixed it or not because you didn't really find anything wrong. And so do I hand the car back to the customer now? Because it could be fixed, but it might also not be fixed. But I can't tell the difference. And you're kind of between a rock and a hard place, right? It's like, did I fix it? Did I not fix it? Was I lucky? Well, you can't know. And so we get these things, customer to manage or customer to monitor, written on the repair order as a way of getting out of that. But effectively, the problem was that they didn't get clear on what actually was happening. And so if we're going to talk about technician engagement, if we're going to go and have a look at that and we look at our technicians and we measure their productivity, we measure their efficiency, and we go, well, there's a gap here. There's a gap between the productivity of my technician or the efficiency of my technician or both, and it doesn't meet my expectation. And we think that it's just an efficiency problem, or we think that it's just a skills problem, or we think that it's just a whatever problem it is that we've decided, a lack of engagement. And then we start trying to fix this lack of engagement. Well, is that the problem or is that the symptom of the problem? Because they can look super, super similar.
It's fascinating, isn't it, when you start to talk about this, because the similarities to people and the mechanics of what's happening in an engine, for argument's sake, it's the same sort of idea, isn't it? Because things can look similar, but can be quite different.
This is the other hair-pulling element to working as a tech, particularly on modern technology. It is so hard sometimes to be able to discern between the symptom of a problem and the root cause of a problem, because they can look identical. And so the way you go about discerning, and this is what we spoke about in that diagnostic class, is you run a test. And so we spoke about the quality of our answers is directly proportional to the quality of our questions. And effectively, a test is a question. How do I know? How can I tell if it's this and not that? How can I tell if my technician engagement problem is just simply a fact that the technicians don't give a damn and are deliberately withholding performance, or the technicians actually really care but are in overwhelm because the expectations on them are so high, it's just unattainable? Like, how would I tell that? How would I test for that? Because depending upon the answer that I get, that's going to determine what action I take. Because they're two very different causes of a technician engagement problem. And you can't just, one size doesn't fit all. It absolutely positively doesn't. If you don't believe me, go and buy shoes. It's the same with working with people. One size doesn't fit all.
It really is important to understand those distinctions, isn't it? And the symptoms as well, and understanding what all of those drivers are is really important to getting your head around, again, the optimal engagement that you want to have with your team. The Frictionless Workshop podcast is brought to you by Solutions Culture. For details on how to get in touch with Andrew, consult the show notes below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, back to the podcast.
And so back to the question, well, how much is enough? The other thing that we teach diagnostic people, and we mentioned this previously, is thinking about your thinking. And I want to pose that same idea to management, to owners, whether you own a workshop, you manage a workshop, you service manager, etc., fixed operations, etc. Think about your thinking. It's perfectly acceptable to expect performance out of your people. That's not an unreasonable thing, right? You pay them money, you pay them superannuation, you pay their holidays, you pay their training, you pay for the resources for them to perform. And so it's not unreasonable for you to expect then some return on your effort. That is entirely valid. And at the same time, how much is enough? And so as management, if we're not thinking about our thinking, if we're not making some tests and assessments on, well, is this actually a accurate assessment? Is this actually a valid assessment? And the part of the challenge we have as management, and certainly automotive management, is when we start to think about how much engagement is enough, how much performance is enough from our technicians. We've got a raft of metrics. We've got a raft of KPIs that we refer back to and go, well, here's the best thinking from the industry. Here's the best thinking from, groups like KPMG, like Deloitte and others who have studied this for decades. And we stop there. And I'm not suggesting that's wrong or bad, but I do want to ask the question, if we're going to think about our thinking, is that in fact right? How do we know that that's right? How do we know that's right for us? How do we know that's right for our team? I appreciate that it's a benchmark, but for us, is that the right thing? Being that a lot of the structures, a lot of the methodology, a lot of the business practice that we use today in workshop dates back to Smithism, which is Adam Smith and the division of labour, and Taylorism, which is Frederick Taylor specifically, and a lot of his work. And those guys were around in the 1700s and the 1800s when they devised their thinking strategies. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that they're wrong, but I am suggesting that people have changed a lot since then. Technology has changed a lot since then. There's been a raft of different things. The values have changed, behaviors have changed, attitudes have changed. There is so much that has shifted, and the ways that we think about things have changed. So I'm not suggesting abandon that, but I am suggesting, well, let's go and test to see if that is still valid, if that is still appropriate, if that is still suitable. Just like, how do I know the difference between a symptom and a cause? Well, I test. How do I know if my management practice and process is the cause of this disengagement that I'm seeing, or if it's a symptom? Because if how I'm running my business, if the benchmarks and KPIs that I'm working to, if these things aren't serving me and I never test, I'll be trying to fix something that I can't fix. I'll be back at that trying to fix quote unquote normal, when in fact the problem I'm trying to solve, I'm not clear on. And so my efforts are going to get frustrated. My results are going to be suboptimal. I'll be off my benchmarks. I'll be off all of these metrics that I track. And it's like, well, I'll start to do things that I think I should be doing, when in fact they're not the things that I need to be doing. It's a bit like a technician, that's got a car no starting, and they're chasing down all of these electrical issues when in fact the car's out of fuel, but we never tested. And so I don't care how good your battery is. If there's no fuel in the car, you're just not going to start, And it's the same with how we do our management. Like, have we actually tested that this is the right way to go? Being that management practice, human behavioral psychology has changed wildly since the 1700s and the 1800s, when these principles that we still operate from were new and novel.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I've got my history right. There weren't any cars in the 1700s.
The very, very first car was invented back then. It was steam powered, actually, and it had no brakes. And of course, they started it up and ran into a tree because there was no brakes.
I thought you were going to give me visions of the Flintstones then for a minute.
Oh, not quite. Not quite. I actually saw, I think it was a replica of the very first ever powered vehicle in the automotive museum in Turin. That was a fascinating time, but that's maybe a story for another time.
But yeah, I mean, just to finish this off, I guess that's the interesting thing about all of this is that how do you actually provide an effective measurement when A, you talk about principles being dated, but B, how do you compare it? How do you create the idea of what optimal levels are at for any given workshop? Because there are so many variables on any given day, and you can look historically, but you have different people in, 5 years ago to what you have today, different tools that are available, different cars, different problems. How do you actually work that out?
There are a couple of basics that you can operate from in terms of working out what's possible. And I'm going to offer that good management, good ownership. We know our numbers. We know what the benchmarks are. We know what they should be. We can work out number of hours per person, number of people in the workshop. That'll give us a pretty good metric. When we start talking about efficiency, there's different benchmarks of efficiency for different roles. So someone who's just doing basic service and changing brake pads, well, it's quite reasonable to expect them to be over 100% efficient. That's very normal. Like 120 is not uncommon. And rewarding and incentivizing people for doing that, I think, is the right thing. When we start to move into repair, well, that becomes a little bit harder. Certainly the first time you come across a particular type of repair, it's going to take you longer as a tech. But after you've done 2, 3 of them, you can really find the gaps in the number that you're supposed to be working to. And you get faster, you get better, you know what you're doing now. It's a bit like the first time you ever drive somewhere. It seems like ages. And then when you finally get there, you go, right, okay, so this is it. And then the second time you drive there, it's way easier. The third time you drive there, and after you've done it 5 times, you can just about do it in your sleep because you're familiar with, it's the same with fixing a problem. When you're doing a repair on something, you get faster as you go along. And again, there are reasonable metrics for this, and that should also be incentivized and rewarded appropriately. When we start talking diagnosis, you're now beyond the ability to incentivize, I think, because the work is so profoundly creative and most of those jobs are one-offs. Yeah, okay, sure, it's a no start, but last time I counted, there was something like 26 different types of no starts. Like the symptom is the same. My car doesn't start, but the root cause is one of 26 possibilities. And then within each of those possibilities, there's a raft of things that can be wrong. And so we're now talking about thousands or tens of thousands of options that you've got to sort through, and trying to make someone go fast for that. That just switches off all of the creative parts of their brain, puts them into stress, and it just takes longer. Daniel Pink wrote a book about this. But ultimately, in terms of, well, what should I do? I think we need to start with the underpinning beliefs and philosophies that we're working to. In that, if I hold or believe that all technicians are lazy, mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, forward-sloping gronks that need to be whipped into place, well, I'm going to do management behavior that works to that belief, right? I'm going to treat my people like they're idiots. I'm going to be riding them from 8 till 5 kind of thing, or whatever the work hours are. And that's not going to be a fun place for my technicians to be, and they'll leave. Conversely, if I change my belief about my technicians, and don't get me wrong, there are technicians that are mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, forward-sloping gronks, just like there are accountants who are like that, and there are managers who are like that, and there are doctors who are like that. Pick one. But if you change your belief and go, well, actually, I think this person can make a really valuable contribution, and how do I get the best out of them, knowing that they want to work, they want to do well, they want to succeed, they want to go home and enjoy a beverage, a glass of warm milk, and just go, well, gee, I had a really good day today, and feel really good about their performance, their behavior. If that's what I believe my people are like, then I'm going to do very different practice, And we talk about push and pull mentalities, that push mentality, that whip, faster, faster, faster. How much longer? Why isn't it done yet? Well, that'll get some results, but it has limitations. If you do the pull, hey, we've got a big day. I'd love you to really knuckle down and give us your best. And they go, yeah, no, I can do that. And now I'm pulling performance out of them rather than pushing them to perform. Oh, that's a very different place to work. Very different place to work. And we don't end up driving our people to disengagement. We recognize and reward and resource them. The 3 R's, right? Reward, recognize, and resource. We do that. We do that well. And now they're in a position where they can perform. We don't just train them. Training's important, don't get me wrong, but we go beyond training. We spoke about the resourceful technician and talking about teaching our people to be resourceful rather than just teaching them to follow a checklist. That's the 2 different worlds. And there's this parallel management practice that has emerged out of human behavioral psychology, that's emerged out of all the research that we know about people, that I don't think automotive is exploiting yet. Like, we're still stuck in our Taylorism and Adam Smithism. And I would offer there is a vast opportunity to do that. And because I think we haven't, this is why we see things like the skill shortage. We bemoan the skill shortage, but I'm going to argue it's a direct result of the things that we've been doing. And if you don't like how things are, well, change something. Do something different.
Thank you for listening to the Frictionless Workshop podcast. For details on how to get Andrew working with you and your technicians, take a look at the show notes. There's also a link to some special content you can access. I'm Anthony Pearl, reminding you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.